Right, let's jump straight in. If you're shooting for an H1 in your history essay, you absolutely need a game plan. For one of the biggest topics out there, the U.S. policy of containment. We're not just going to tell you the story today, we're going to break down exactly how you can build a top-grade argument piece by piece.
Okay, this is it. This is the whole game. This is the core question your examiner needs you to answer. Don't ever lose sight of it. Every single paragraph, every fact you drop in has to be a tool you're using to figure out just how effective this policy really was. That right there is the secret to a top-tier essay.
Look, if you want a H1, you've got to come out swinging with a strong thesis statement right in your intro. Something just like this. Forget saying it was simply good or bad. Use a phrase like a qualified success. You know, that word qualified is absolute gold. It instantly tells the examiner that you're about to build a really smart argument, weighing the wins against the pretty serious hidden costs. This one sentence is going to be the bedrock of your entire essay. And here is the perfect structure, the perfect roadmap for your essay, which we're going to follow right now. We'll start with the doctrine itself, then we'll analyze its success in Europe, the messy stalemate in Asia, the terrifying nuclear brink, the price America paid at home, and then finally we'll pull it all together into one powerful conclusion.
Okay, first things first. Let's get our heads around the core concept. The containment doctrine, which was cooked up by diplomat George Kennan back in 1947, wasn't about defeating communism where it already was. Nope. The whole strategy was to stop it from spreading, to basically build a wall around it and contain it, using economic pressure, diplomacy, and, if things got really bad, military force.
First up, Europe. Now this is your go-to example of containment working as a clean success. In Berlin, the US managed to get what it wanted and forced the Soviets to back down, all without a single shot being fired. Let's see how they pulled it off.
So the Berlin Blockade was the first massive test. In 1948, Stalin basically tried to starve West Berlin into giving up by cutting off all roads and railways. Now, sending in tanks would have meant World War III. So instead, the US and its allies did something incredible, a gigantic airlift. This was a direct showdown, but it was fought with logistics, not with weapons.
Now, a number like this is exactly the kind of evidence you need to have in your back pocket. Don't just say there was an airlift, show its scale. Writing down that 2.3 million tons of supplies were flown in tells the examiner you've done your homework and you get just how massive this logistical victory really was. So, what's the big takeaway here? The Berlin airlift was a clear, undeniable win for containment. It proved that the whole idea could work using economic and logistical power, not just military force. Stalin had no choice but to back down. In your essay, you can confidently call this one a clean success.
All right, let's fast forward to 1961 and the Berlin Wall. When the Soviets threw up that wall, it was another huge challenge. But this time, containment became more symbolic, more psychological, and JFK's famous speech in '63 was a masterclass in how to do it.
This is a classic H1 level skill. You can't just drop the quote, "Ich bin ein Berliner," into your essay and move on. You've got to analyze it, explain why it was so important. It was a powerful bit of psychological containment, a clear message to Moscow that America wasn't backing down, and it was a huge morale boost for the West. This was diplomacy as a weapon.
Okay, now we're going to pivot to Asia, and this is where your argument gets a lot more complex. If Berlin was a clean win, Korea was a brutal, bloody stalemate. Here, we see containment shift from logistics to all-out military intervention, and its effectiveness becomes, a whole lot harder to argue.
So, to really understand why the US got involved in Korea, you have to get this concept, the domino theory. This was the fear that kept American policymakers up at night. President Truman was convinced that if South Korea fell to communism, Japan, the Philippines, and the rest of Asia would be next, like a line of dominoes. For him, containment in Korea was about holding a critical line in the sand.
And this line of latitude, it became the ultimate symbol of what containment meant in Asia. After 3 years of unbelievably brutal fighting and millions of casualties, the war ended right back where it started. The 38th parallel basically represents the outcome in Korea. A costly, bloody stalemate that did stop a communist takeover of the South, but it didn't achieve anything close to a decisive victory.
This quote from General MacArthur is perfect for showing the major conflict inside the U.S. government. See, he was in the total victory camp, but Truman, he chose limited war, which is the very definition of containment, because he was terrified of starting a much bigger war with China and the Soviets. Sacking MacArthur was a huge call, and it's a great point to analyze in your essay to show these internal debates.
This comparison right here is absolutely vital for a top-grade essay. You should dedicate a whole paragraph to contrasting Berlin and Korea directly. It shows the examiner you get the main point. Containment wasn't a one-size-fits-all policy. It was a strategy that changed, sometimes radically, depending on where you were. What worked in Europe just did not work the same way in Asia.
Okay, now we get to containment's most dangerous moment. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 is where the policy pushed the entire world right to the edge of nuclear war. It asked the ultimate question: was stopping communism from spreading worth risking the end of human civilization?
The crisis unfolded over 13 absolutely terrifying days. When U.S. spy planes found Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba, JFK had to do something. Invading could start a nuclear war. But doing nothing? That was political suicide. His choice? A naval blockade, which he very cleverly called a quarantine, was his attempt to contain the situation without immediately starting World War III.
This is the essential term you need for your analysis of the crisis. Both Kennedy and Khrushchev were practicing brinkmanship. It's like a high-stakes game of chicken, where each leader pushes the other closer and closer to the brink of war, hoping the other guy swerves first. It was containment at its absolute most risky.
So, how do you evaluate this in your essay? Well, on one hand, it was a success. The missiles were removed and nuclear war didn't happen. Phew! But the crucial analysis, the H1 point, is that it was a terrifying success. It showed that containment, when pushed to its absolute limit in the nuclear age, carried an almost unbelievable risk. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and the policy would have failed in the most catastrophic way imaginable.
Now, for the highest marks, you have to go beyond the international crises. You have to analyze what this policy of containment was doing to America itself. What was the price of being on constant alert for decades?
Say, the policy of containment fundamentally changed the American government. The need for constant crisis mode led to the creation of powerful and secretive groups like the CIA. It fueled a massive military-industrial complex, and crucially, it gave presidents enormous power in foreign policy. This created what became known as a credibility gap between what the government was saying and what it was actually doing, a problem that would poison American politics for years and lead directly to the protests and distrust of the Vietnam War era. Okay, let's bring it all home. After looking at the evidence from Europe, from Asia, and from the nuclear brink, we need to deliver our final verdict on the policy of containment.
This table is pretty much the perfect model for your conclusion. You lay out the evidence clearly, the policy was highly effective in Berlin, it was a costly stalemate in Korea, and it was a high-risk success in Cuba. So your final judgment comes right back around to your thesis. The policy of containment was, without a doubt, a qualified success, a flexible but also incredibly dangerous strategy whose results were never, ever guaranteed.
And that is how you stick the landing in a top-tier essay. You end with a thought-provoking question that links to what happens next. You see, all of these crises, from Berlin to Cuba, created a Cold War consensus in America, this powerful belief that communism had to be contained at any cost, anywhere in the world. And it was that unwavering belief that would eventually lead the United States down the long, tragic road into Vietnam.